So we all know INEOS had a big meeting on Tuesday because it's been the talk of the media, and all the attention about that meeting on Tuesday has been about Ten Hag's future, and we will cover that later in today's video. But in that meeting, they were there to discuss January transfer plans, obviously contingency plans if they do sack Ten Hag, financial costs, sponsorships, the new stadium, new staff coming in, and more. It wasn't just a meeting focused on Ten Hag. And now we're getting a little bit of news and information about what United might do in the January window. Now, I would take all January news with a pinch of salt, just because we don't know who the manager could be in January. It might not be Ten Hag. Even if he's staying now, doesn't mean he'll be here in January. But I also know the only real position United are looking at that I've been told in January is left back, with Anthony Robinson being someone they like. But there has been some links to Tchouaméni, Kolo Muani. INEOS do not want 2 consecutive seasons outside the Champions League, so could spend big in January. We've also got news updates in terms of injuries. Quite a few players have dropped out of international break. How serious are those injuries? Mason Mount is, yes, injured again. And then we will talk about Ten Hag's future. So hello and welcome back to Alice Talks Football, and welcome back to your 10-minute Manchester United news roundup. Please do go ahead and hit that like button if you have not already. And of course, subscribe down below if you're new, as I'm going to round up all the latest Manchester United news into a 10-minute video for you guys, starting with the latest on the injury front. It was said Garnacho, minor issues, precautionary, probably fine, just needs that 2-week break. Mainoo, Mount, Maguire, a few weeks, could be sooner depending on rehab. So Mainoo, Mount, Maguire may require a few weeks. They may miss the first and second game back. Considering we believe that Mason Mount had a concussion and then had also somehow picked out another injury that's going to put him out for a couple of weeks, it's not Mason Mount's fault, but Mason Mount is almost becoming worse than Luke Shaw, because Luke Shaw's out for long periods of time, but we might get Luke Shaw back for 6 to 8 weeks and get 10 games out of him. Mason Mount, you can get 2 games out of him and then he breaks again. Honestly, Mason Mount injured again for Manchester United. But he should be back soon. And then obviously, and it's not even concussion, he had another knock on top of his concussion. And then obviously Mazraoui is being treated and assessed. Hopefully nothing bad with Mazraoui, because Luke Shaw Malacia, we've been told, will not be back to mid-November at the earliest. So if Mazraoui is out, it is Lindelof at fullback for starting games, or Leacher at fullback, because he's not going to play Harry Amas. So we've got to kind of hope that Mazraoui and Dalot are fit so they can basically play every game, because we need them to. Now, talking of transfer window, I think we might sign a left back in January, but I'm going to get into some stories. Now, if I'm going to be honest, I do not see this happening. I would love it to happen. I do not see it happening. Real Madrid are reportedly open to selling Tchouaméni for around 66 million next summer, with Liverpool the club most likely to sign the midfielder. Man United are also interested in signing midfielder. If Man United want to sign Tchouaméni for £66 million, I am all for it. Would Tchouaméni go to United in the current state we're in? Absolutely not. If you're a midfielder, I don't know why you come to United when the setup is running the midfielders out to dry. So I don't see it happening. I hope he does end up at Liverpool. But apparently Real Madrid could be willing to sell him. So it could be one to keep an eye on, because we know that Manchester United have always wanted Tchouaméni. They always wanted to sign a big fans. But interestingly, one player that United could sign, and could even sign in January, is Kolo Muani. I mean, some sources saying we're preparing a 58 million bid to sign him, even though he's kind of been crap at PSG the last year. It was said that Manchester United's pursuit of Randal Kolo Muani, a move towards a goal or another gamble. Manchester United's hunt for a proven goal scorer has become more urgent as they target Paris Saint-Germain Randal Kolo Muani player who could inject energy into attack. Recent reports and team talk suggest that United are gearing up a massive 58 million bid to bring in Kolo Muani to Old Trafford, with their summer signings yet to make a consistent impact. But the question remains, is Kolo Muani the answer? So there is sort of talks that United are preparing a big bid for Kolo Muani in January. I don't think we are. I know that we almost signed this guy and we signed Højlund instead, but he's not been very good at PSG. I don't think we're going to spend 58 million on another striker, when I know that left back and another midfielder is the priority at INEOS, and they probably want a winger before another striker. And the reason Man United aren't scoring goals isn't because of Xerxes and Højlund. It's just because of the attack as a whole is disjointed, because of the way it was set up is disjointed. I feel like any striker would come to United and not get the goals until we fix out the structure, the attack and the problems. I don't think it's about spending 60 million on the striker to try and help us score goals when we're not creating enough for the striker or giving the striker the ball enough, if you want my honest opinion. Now, there is reports of paying a 58 million bid for him in January, but I take it with a pinch of salt, because 1, it's come from team talk, and 2, it's the international break. And as I tell you guys, the international break, that's when the most nonsense waffle BS news comes out, because people need to write a story on United for clicks. So they write a story with no realism there, just to write a story about United for the sake of it, and that's when we get the fake news. Now, one story we've been getting a lot lately is Ten Hag's future. Is he staying? Is he going? I think there's been a shift towards him staying recently, being in charge for the Brentford game, but he might not be in charge for too much longer as well. So let's dive into what has been said so far on Erik Ten Hag's future. Graham Bailey said this: some members of the hierarchy did think the time was right to end Ten Hag's tenure, but they did not come to an overall agreement. The hierarchy are not in fully agreement who can replace Ten Hag. So Ten Hag's future was obviously discussed at this meeting, and what's being said is there was people there that thought Ten Hag should be sacked, but not everybody at that meeting could agree that Ten Hag could be sacked. They couldn't come to a full agreement. They couldn't agree on a potential replacement, and for that, Erik Ten Hag gets more time. Some even suggest that Erik Ten Hag is getting borrowed time. Fabrizio Romano then said on the situation and what he knows, he says Ten Hag has received no communication from the club. INEOS is still discussing internally. It's an intense situation. So Romano's not coming out and saying that he's safe. Romano is saying that INEOS is still discussing this internally. It's a tense situation. Ten Hag has no communication. Because he's received no communication, I think Ten Hag believes he's staying and he's back for the Brentford game soon, because he's got to start preparing for that in a few days. And I think if they were going to sack Ten Hag, they'd probably tell him right after the meeting. But INEOS are still discussing things internally. They could tell him tomorrow. We could find out he's sacked on Saturday. He might not be sacked at all. That's sort of the situation on it. But he's saying it's a tense situation. So even if he's not sacked, it doesn't mean he couldn't be sacked in a few weeks as well. It was then said by Romano that Erik Ten Hag's not received any communication, so we'll be preparing for the Brentford game as normal. And I think because he's preparing for the Brentford game as normal, because he's received no communication, everyone's like, okay, he's staying. And maybe they tell him tomorrow he's sacked, so maybe he goes. I think he's staying. If I was going to be honest, I'm going to predict that he's staying. But, that doesn't mean he's going to be here in a month's time, even if he stays, if things don't improve, because we know that INEOS have their doubts. It was also said, United sources said the meeting was pre-scheduled and they would not communicate any conclusions from their rendezvous. Finances, commercial plans and plans for a new Old Trafford were also discussed, as well as the team's performance. The natural assumption is Erik Ten Hag will attend the pre-match press conference at Carrington next Thursday, and he'll be at Old Trafford in the dugout against Brentford in 2 days' time. Although Sir Jim Ratcliffe is understood to like the possibility of Thomas Tuchel taking over. So it's basically been said that the United meeting was for many things. Obviously, they're not going to give out too much information and communicate the conclusions from that. Of course, the team's performance and Ten Hag's future was discussed. But as of now, it doesn't look like INEOS have made a decision to sack Ten Hag. They couldn't come to an agreement. He's probably got the Brentford game, a couple others. If that goes bad, they will probably bring in a replacement and look to sack him. We know that Sir Jim Ratcliffe is a massive fan of Thomas Tuchel and would probably bring Thomas Tuchel in if he got the choice. It was said by Mark Ogden that Erik Ten Hag is on borrowed time at Manchester United, and it's a big mix in reports, because some reports saying he's probably fine, and other reports saying he's on borrowed time, he's destined to go. There's lots of mixed reports on sort of Erik Ten Hag, and I think it is just media guesswork, but my prediction would be he's probably staying. It said that Ten Hag believes he'll be in charge for the game against Brentford at Old Trafford in 10 games, and planning to be back on the training ground early next week. If he is back on the training ground early next week, I think he's safe. It was said that tensions are reportedly rising within Manchester United hierarchy regarding Erik's ability to turn around the team's fortunes, and sources close to the clubs suggest that confidence in the Dutch manager is basically going, and that Ratcliffe is believed to have reservations about Ten Hag's future at Old Trafford. However, Ratcliffe has opted to consult with football experts Dan Ashworth and Barada, who are willing to give Ten Hag more time. Despite this, the likelihood Ten Hag's tenure is extending beyond November is becoming increasingly uncertain. Should results fail to improve significantly in the coming weeks, the Dutch manager may face the prospect of dismissal. So again, it's sort of been said and suggested that, Dan Ashworth and Barada, they ultimately are advising Ratcliffe on what to do, and they've probably advised Ratcliffe to keep him, even though Ratcliffe wants to get rid of him, and Ratcliffe's going to listen to them because they're the footballing experts. But there is a feeling that even though they're keeping Ten Hag, doesn't mean he'll be here in November. There's a feeling that he could be sacked a month later in the next international break, a little bit like Ollie was. And finally, Simon Stone said some things on the situation. He said he approached the United chief, Jean-Claude Blanc, for a comment on Ten Hag's future at the European Clubs Association meeting in Athens, and he declined. He said for now Ten Hag remains in a job, and he is having a few days away from the club as a customary during the break. So unless the situation changes, he will begin preparations for the league game with Brentford at Old Trafford on the 19th of October is what has been said. So that is all the latest Manchester United news rounded up into a 10-minute video, guys. Please do go ahead and hit that like button, and of course subscribe down below if you're new. Thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye.